Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm Sarah Condon, your host. In just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-host, RJ Heyman and David Zoll. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. Glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Okay, it is July the 26th, and we are back after a little break. I have been to the beach, and now I'm home. And I know, Sarah, you've been away as well. How was, I think you guys were in the Pacific Northwest?
We were kind of on a Handmaid's Tale tour. So we just tried out Canada to see what it was like and then came back down.
What did you find?
Canadians are so nice. They are as nice as everyone says that they are. I mean, every experience we had was really lovely. It was great. It was a really, really good trip.
Rutger, everything well on your end?
We're doing okay. I'm finally sort of settled back in after my blissful sabbatical time, which seems, I don't know, like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But we're doing good. We're having a good summer. I'm car shopping for my 16-year-old, which will absolutely come up more over the course of this podcast, so consider that a teaser.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. I was hoping we'd learn something about that process.
More car talk. I know, we need more car talk.
Well, since it's kind of a quiet time and the dog days of summer, I thought it was safe enough to have an episode that was sort of law-focused completely. And by that, I mean that the first thing that we're going to look at is a report from McSweeney's, a humorous report, a medical report, woman hospitalized after attempting effortless lifestyle. This is by Patricia Lawler-Kennett. A 36-year-old woman was admitted to the emergency room this afternoon after several attempts at a quote-unquote effortless lifestyle. Symptoms include exhaustion, depletion of savings, paranoia, and inadequate space to store cosmetics. The history is the patient reports attempting effortless lifestyle after a friend of a friend claimed she was heading to Tuscany for 2 weeks with quote-unquote 4 simple essentials, one of which included a sundress that converted to a tablecloth for quote last-minute picnics. Discussion of the disease, effortless lifestyle syndrome, was first reported in the early 2000s and reached epidemic proportions a few years later, with spikes in New York, Los Angeles, London, and affluent suburbs where there is more than one Michael's craft store within a 15-mile radius. The disease is highly contagious. Prognosis is poor in this case since patient states she is planning on renovating her kitchen overnight using only a coconut shell, 6 empty bottles of Pellegrino, and a Shenzhen Nongki orchid she grew in her garden. The treatment prescribed is a full-time job, needy friends, and a dirty bathroom.
Check, and check.
So, I feel like we were just talking about one another here. According to my Instagram, or at least my wife's Instagram, we've had a very effortless 2 weeks at the beach. There's been no crying, no tears, no meltdowns in the middle of the night, no ice cream getting into every crevice of our car, nothing like that. It's just
no
been
credit card debt.
No credit card debt, nothing like that. I mean, what came to mind when you guys read this?
Well, it's so sharply written. It's so well written that honestly, I was like, Stephanie Phillips could have written this because this is the kind of commentary that she provides sometimes on this stuff. But I loved the I shopped for all of the ingredients at the farmer's market on the way home from work, then showered, jumped into a Paisley Captain, and entertained until 3 a.m. without ever going to the bathroom. It was all so easy. This is so funny. I mean, the best things are funny and sad. It's so funny. It's also so sad because some of the stuff hit really close to home. I mean, the caftan, the entertain till 3 a.m. wasn't quite my vibe. But Dave, you read under the part called Discussion of Disease. So the best known vectors are websites that create bi-weekly content such as Contour While You Drive, which is a makeup thing. I don't know if you guys know that. Or this one hit close to home, breastfeeding and barbecuing. There is. I flashed into my brain to our son's Oh my gosh. It must have been his 4th birthday. And Annie was still breastfeeding and like 6 months old. And I remember like having on like a long, probably a caftan, right? Like a long dress, and like having her in like a thing that tied around me that looked really cool, but probably not something I used on a regular basis, but it looked really cool. And just feeling totally miserable on the inside and exhausted and overdone. And like, why am I trying to do a birthday party with a 6-month-old? But on the outside, trying to look really pulled together for everyone that was at the party, you know? And then, of course, this is sort of relevant to later conversation, but, you know, my husband's the priest and it's the church school. So like, I need to look like really pulled together and Christian. And yeah, I mean, this was great. It was also like hit pretty close to home.
Yeah, I thought immediately I've been on a major Mr. Rogers kick, you know, ever since I taught that class, and we talked about it here. So I thought about him coming back after all those kids were putting on Superman outfits and jumping off of roofs. Like, they were trying to live effortless lives, right? Like, I'm Superman. I'm going to put this on. I'm going to jump off a roof and break my arm. And it's just like we don't ever learn. You know, we think we can do things that we can't do. And then it also hit close to home for me this week, because to bring it back to cars, which I'm going to be doing a lot of. I'm car shopping for Jackson, and I'm trying to find him something like, I have a very specific idea of what I want, and I think what he wants, and he's such a good kid, and he never asks for anything, but it's really, really stressing me out. You know, I'm trying to find like the perfect example of this car. I'm doing like compulsive nationwide Craigslist and Auto Trader and Cards.com searches, and part of it does flow from my need to live this kind of like perfect, effortless life, even though it's kind of a vintage car. It's probably going to be a nightmare. You know, I'm getting myself in way over my head, and I probably should just give up and not do it. So I don't know. I'm feeling that too. Like, I want to give him this perfect gift, but it's not going to be perfect, and it's really stressing me out. And I don't know, bring up all my insecurities about being a good father and stuff like that. So we all have our own, because I like cars. And anyway.
I mean, when we talk about the injunction to, you know, be more, do more, be better, you know, achieve, it really is. It's not just that you need to have it all or do it all, but you need to do it effortlessly. That's sort of that's like the dagger in the stomach of after the machete of the law comes down. It's like you not only have to accomplish these things, at least and everyone's trying to kind of give the impression that they're doing it, but then you have to give the impression that you're not doing it without even trying to do it. And it's this really vicious cycle of, I think, self-consciousness, in fact, masquerading as its opposite. That, it makes for really, really good satire, I think. But it also, you're right, it's sad, especially around vacation time when the whole country seems to be on the highways, going to the beaches. Yeah. If you were coming back anywhere, I mean, and you know, obviously not everyone can go away or wants to go away, but those highways and just seeing the amount of people surviving their vacation, and God only knows what sort of impression they're trying to give off, though. You know, it's like that. I always think of that REM video that Everybody Hurts, when the cars are stopped on the highway and you kind of go into each car and everyone's hurting in some different way, and yet they're probably on their way back from the beach and they've got a tan and they're in California and it's beautiful, and yet what's really going on inside is not effortless at all. In fact, the injunction is sort of is outlawing kind of safety and the ability to kind of actually deal with what you're doing. Maybe that's too dark.
Dave, that's so true. I mean, my wife and I, we literally get into a fight every time we're leaving for a vacation.
Yes.
You know, every time we have to pack the car up, every time the house has to be clean, every time have the boys packed, you know, what have we done? And it's, I'll be honest, it's mostly my fault because I get really stressed out. And part of that stress is, why is it so hard to sort of get to a place where things can be easier? You know, everything just seems to be difficult, and this frustration and something in me that tells me that life should be easier than it is, which is not often the case, you know, and when life doesn't add up to the way you feel like it should be, or you're told it should be, or anyway.
Well, I guess all we need is a full-time job, needy friends, and a dirty bathroom. The needy friends I already have. I mean, I'm looking at 2 of them right now.
Hey.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I often feel like God is so present when we're on vacation, like, and not because I drag everyone to churches, but like at these odd moments, I feel like God just like shows up. And I think part of it is because we're so miserable. Like, because like vacation is this like, well, I mean, our kids are still, you know, we have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and we're just now not doing, because we do these for too long in our family, bottles or sippy cups. We're still doing diapers. And like, it's you're just sort of out on it reminds me actually of Charlotte and Stephanie's book. You're sort of out on a boat, like, right? Like floating around when you're on vacation, and you've all got to deal with each other.
And fast and
yeah, you're like desperate. And so there's these like odd moments where I feel like God shows up, and, you know, we had this really terrifying experience when we were in Vancouver. Our daughter has this stuffed animal called Lion that she's had since she was an infant, and she actually has to have him to sleep because she tucks his tail onto her thumb and sucks, and that's how she sleeps at night. So he's always with her, and she had my hand and she dropped Lion like as we're coming around a corner in Vancouver. She drops my hand and she runs out into the street, crouched as a 4-year-old, right? Mm-hmm. Just as a car is like coming around the curve, and they stop, they slam on their brakes, and I'm screaming, and Josh is turning, you know, and we're grabbing Annie. And I actually took a picture of the lion and put up the story on Instagram. What I didn't put, there's always like the deeper level is like, you know, that it like really ruined the day. It was really hard to have that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, like God in all his mercy in this moment, right? Our kid is okay. And also like we could have lost our kid. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the kind of stuff. It's weird now that we're in this world where vacations get shared so much. And I certainly share our vacations more than I should. But there's, you know, it's like 8% of what's actually happening.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this kind of idea that we're under the injunction to perform even on our vacation, or even, I guess that effortlessness needs to be evinced in all things, especially if you're a person who is a Christian or trying to become some sort of a moral example to people. I was thinking about the kind of ratcheting up of the law as it relates to something that Troy Elliott wrote for our website this week. The way it reminded me of the effortlessness thing is that J.D. Koku, you guys know, he was saying, I find that the people who are the most adamant about teaching free will sanctification are the least sanctified people I've ever met, meaning the people that are the most effortless on Instagram, if you were to be around them, they're the ones evincing the most effort and probably resenting the hell out of anyone who gets in their way and makes it look like it's not the case. But Troy, he wrote this wonderful thing called Warnings Are Useless. And he's trying to talk about the wisdom inherent in God's law. He says he recognizes it, not just the parts that I'm occasionally, fleetingly, accidentally good at. And I'm acutely aware that I'm not supposed to be wearing cargo shorts and listening to Electric Light Orchestra in a non-ironic way. I disagree. I violate God's law and I feel convicted. I violate the little L laws of society and I feel enlightened. But what I fear may be the truth of the matter, that whether I'm living temporarily self-righteously or whether I'm congratulating myself on throwing off the yoke of direct TV, all I'm really doing is whatever I was going to do anyway. It's just me doing me, adrift on my own ocean of self. No amount of admonishment seems to have any effect. And then he finishes, he says, last week at church, I started thinking about the origins of our confession of sin, the one we pray every week all year. How did this get in there, I wondered. I'm no theologian or historian, but I have to think that at some point someone must have said, you know what, let's go ahead and put this confession thing in here because we'll never have to worry about it not being applicable. They were that sure about human nature, and thank God. I cling to that confession because at the end of the day, at the end of every day, despite the admonishments, the warnings, the exhortations about the severe and dire consequences of our shortcomings, we do what we do. That's why grace is truly amazing. We listen to advice, we read the word, we pontificate and point out where others fall short, and yet we pretty much do whatever we want to do and hope that most of it falls within the bounds of pretty okay or something we can live with or at least something we can rationalize later. And yet we are loved. Not only loved, but embraced, taken in, marked as God's own. Now, I know that's sort of a left turn slightly from the effortlessness of Instagram, but I found it to be, deeply comforting in the way that it acknowledged most of the ways in which I'm actually feeling like I'm fulfilling the law are just the ways in which my own natural proclivities coincide briefly with what God has asked of me or the society has deemed approvable. Where did you guys land on that?
Oh, it reminded me of what David Foster Wallace wrote. What did he say? Sooner or later, at the end of the day, you end up becoming yourself. Was that the quote? You would probably know exactly what the quote is, Dave, but something along those lines. And yeah, it's true. It's like when you have kids, or really before you have kids, you think to yourself, oh, I'm going to mold them and shape them and, they're going to be incredible. And I mean, they are incredible, but I'm going to have more control over who they end up being. And then you have kids and you realize you get what you get and you don't get upset because kids end up being who they are when they come out, and you don't seem to have actually that much control over that, and this idea that people actually aren't that mutable, that I'm probably going to be dealing with the same questions, anxieties, sins, 30 years from now, if I'm still alive, as I am today. I remember Aaron Zimmerman saying about this about a small group he was a part of at a church formerly with a bunch of older men. And he sort of thought to himself, well, older men, they get older and their passions wane. And he's like, no, that's just not at all the case. It was a bunch of like 18-year-olds in 75-year-old bodies. They're just the same as they ever were, even though they're older. So that's what I thought. People are who they are.
I thought this is one of the best things we've had on the website recently, to be honest with you. I thought it's such an accessible way of looking at this this kind of freedom that we have when we realize that we are who we are, right? That we we can't really impact the change of who we are. And I think we forget like how radical this message is. I'm in a couple of groups, secret groups on social media, where they're sort of, one of them particularly sort of a haven for people to talk about grace. And, and there was a woman who got on recently and she just said, I keep hearing my pastor say that they're the kind of people that bear fruit and they're the kind of people that don't. And I identify more with sin. And, this makes me feel so awful. And I mean, that's why we have to hear this stuff over and over again, because you can't, it's almost impossible to take it for granted. I mean, I found this piece as comforting as the first kind of stuff that I read on Mockingbird's website. And it made so much sense. It reminded me a lot, actually. I've been rereading, Chad Bird's book, Your God is Too Glorious. And he has this amazing way of writing about how we think we have control over our lives and how, there's such good news in that we don't, and that, what we would have planned and what we would have expected. I mean, he talks about like, having a teenage daughter and her getting pregnant, or, this kind of stuff that happens in everyone's lives, and how God uses these things, even if they're really hard for us. And I have to live in that camp because it's so tempting to live in the Instagram camp. It's so tempting to think if I just get the right, essential oil or like headband for my baby or like all the random things I bought, if I just do those things, then I will be effortless. Then everything, that camp kills me so quickly. Actually, the worst thing is like if you have your phone out, right, and you're going to take a picture and it's accidentally set on the reverse mode where it's trying, and you're like, oh my God, like that's what I look like, that's actually right, like that's actually sin. That's actually like we're so unchangeable, that's what it is. Like it's the weird red spot on my nose that won't go away.
If you're going to be a pastor or a priest or like anyone who wants to actually love anyone else, you can't help. You've got to have this perspective, because if you have the perspective that people are changeable and they can control themselves and they can get better, you're just going to end up hating them and resenting them and not actually being able to love them and accept them as they are. And what does Paul write? But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace has not been without its effect on me. So. Yeah, Paul has to come to a place where he accepts who he is and what he's done and accepts the grace of God. And that's a tough thing to do. And it's really not something our culture tells us to do. Like, by all means, never accept who you are. Always be better. You need to be better. But I just don't see any other way to live anything approaching a peaceful, loving life.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be a pastor; just be married. It's like if it's I love you,
right.
I love you when you change, or I love you if you change, or I love you if you stop doing X, Y, and Z. it may, it's like it was that great This Is 40. Remember when Paul Rudd tries to stop eating the cupcakes and she starts to stop smoking, and they make this pact to be better for the sake of their marriage and the sake of their kids, and they end up he ends up out at the trash can, picking out the cupcake and smashing it in his face, and she's smoking all the time behind his back, and they finally just be like, well, they kind of come together in their moments of failure, and that's when their love is reborn. And we know this, but love really is something we fail into, I think, rather than.
That's a good line.
Dave,
love is something
that's
we not fall into.
Fail into? Excuse me?
I say that
so
I think the spirit is among us.
Such a way with
I'm
words.
working on my book, and I was actually just finished the Seculosity of Romance chapter, and I used that line. So people out there, do not steal it. It's under copyright.
So viral. Hashtag fail into love. I'm calling it trademarked
Well,
right now.
speaking of failure,
I shall make millions.
Speaking of failure, R.J. Heyman, you wrote a
Yes,
devastating, I think, incredibly honest but beautiful post this week for the website, and I think it just cut me to the core, but also not just because I love you and not because I was just there, but it really spoke to me in a much larger way, just as a person living in the world. Your starting point was this wonderful podcast Startup, which is Gimlet Media as a sort of a large podcasting company, and This American Life actually highlighted part of it, and they're doing every season they profile a different company, an entrepreneur that's sort of getting going. In the first season, they profile themselves, actually. And this season, they decided to profile a church plant because one of the producers is a Christian. He jokes about coming out as a Christian to his boss, and they decide to do this. And basically, they profile a church plant in inner city Philadelphia where the guy who originally starts it completely burns out, and he's replaced by it's sort of predominantly African American, and he's replaced by this guy named AJ, who's a white guy with dreads, I think, but married to a black lady. And so there's that element going on. There's a socioeconomic, racial element, but really, what's happening is there's this amazing Christian. It's all the only way to know how to say it. He's anxious, he's open, he's vulnerable, he's clearly trying to do the right thing, and you kind of just love this guy, and you walk with him as he tries to get their space ready and put the band together and get a sign up and everything. There's always one step forward, two steps back, but clearly, RJ, I don't really want to talk about it that much more. I want to talk more about what it brought up for you. Can you just I can read back to you the post, but I'd rather you just riff off of Startup.
Well, I hope the post wasn't too devastating. I felt that way, and I mean, clearly, it's been 6 years, but there's not too many people that you can talk to about sort of being a church plant or having a failed church plant. I mean, as I say in the article, the Startup podcast itself came out right after I moved to Houston and kind of the plant had failed. And there was so much in the podcast, just as guy starting a business and the anxiety that went along with that, the questioning that I really related to. And Alex Bloomberg, the founder of Gimlet Media, was so profoundly open, and his wife was on there and they talked about it, and money issues, anxiety. We talked to his therapist. It was that in itself was kind of cathartic and healing. But of course, it sort of hit me in a totally new way. And in some ways, I don't want to say PTSD exactly, but I can just relate so much to what AJ was saying and all these hopes and dreams that you have. I think especially what he says about wanting to plant a church for people who aren't Christians, and then you actually start a church, and the only people that show up are a bunch of Christians. That was something I also learned. The financial struggles, the questions over, did I hear clearly? This call that I thought God made really clear, but things don't seem to be working out the way I thought they would. I make a hint on it, but Dave, you were there with me founding Mockingbird at the same time, and we were kind of partners in crime, and it was really fun before you and Kate moved down to Charlottesville to sort of continue the ministry down there. But I mean, I used to have dreams. Like I had a quote unquote prophetic dream where you and me and Kate and Jamie, my wife, were all hanging out looking at this little plant, like this potted plant that all of a sudden started to grow spontaneously and basically turn into sort of Jack and the Beanstalk, where it's just like, go, grow. And I was like, there you go. That was a prophetic dream. Like God is going to bless this thing. It's going to be amazing. It's going to go like gangbusters. And there were parts of it that were amazing and went like gangbusters. But at the end of the day, we just couldn't pay the bills. And we couldn't make it work, and I had two small kids, and man, that last year of just the insecurity of not knowing how are we going to pay the rent, how are we going to how am I going to feed my family? So it brought up a lot of stuff for me. And I was talking with a fellow priest, Sarah, you and I have at St. Martin's, Jonathan Adams, who planted a successful church plant in Atlanta, which is still going. And I've been talking to him about it this week. I said, how did you reach financial self-sustainability? He said, well, we had two families show up early on, and they just started giving 5 figures a month. And I was like, well, that helps. And we never had that in New York City. And I said, well, what did you do? What was your strategy? How did you develop your donors? How did you build relationships? And he said, I didn't. They just showed up and started giving, and we were able to pay the bills. And I think there was some relief in that too, of feeling like at the end of the day, it really is all up to God. And as I said in my post, if I could talk to AJ and his wife, I have no idea how their plan's going to turn out. I would just comfort them that there is, if it's successful, fantastic. And I actually had someone sent me an email who said he planted a church that was quote unquote successful, but and did that for 18 years, and it left him totally burned out after 18 years. So maybe it'll be successful, and that's wonderful. But even if it's not, and you have to move on to something else, God will be there on the other side. God is there on the other side, and He knows the plans He has for you. And it's not to break you down or crush you, as much as it may feel like it. But that God is merciful and faithful at the end of the day. And we certainly discovered that to be the case, because we ended up in an amazing church in an amazing city that we never thought we'd be here, but it was so clearly God's gift to us. And I look back on that experience, I think even that was an incredible gift, because I was able to experience God's faithfulness in a way I never had before. And I guess the last thing I'll say, there have been a number of priests in my life, pastors who I really, really respected, and almost without fail, each one of them had at least one major ministry failure / catastrophe. And so I think there was always part of me that knew that in order to become the kind of, preacher, pastor, person that I wanted to be, I was going to have to experience some failure. And I didn't really want that to happen. But it did happen, and it'll probably happen again. But I do think, this whole theology of the cross thing we believe is true. God works through failure. God shows up and refines in the midst of difficulty. And I think that experience was hugely important, even as it was hard, and in some ways continues to be hard. So anyway, I'm abreacting all over the place with this, as is my wife, as we listen to AJ and Leah kind of right in the thick of it. And it's been fun and powerful. So
Josh and I have listened to this on vacation together, and I think the thing that the first thing that really hit me was sort of how, and AJ talked about this, RJ, you talked about this, how we define success. And how we define success in the broader world, and then how success is defined in a church. And there is something, and I have not experienced this, we've never been a part of a church plant, but there's something really sad to me about the fact that a group of people can gather in this way and can worship, and it can be 40 people, which is right where they were before Easter. And then I think they had a few more after Easter or whatever, but 40 people, and that's not enough, right? That's not financially, that's not enough, but spiritually, maybe it is. And that is so complicated, and, also plays into this struggle that AJ talks about, that Leah talks about, where it's like, who am I trying to be for the sake of this church? And who am I, truly in Jesus, and how those can feel very different. And that I found incredibly relatable, church plant or not, because, things can feel really personality driven, and you're like, okay, but who, what is that worth? That's not worth anything. That's not anything happening, right, if people aren't recognizing God in their midst. And the other thing I wanted to say about it is I just think it's such a crucial listen for any we're mostly wives. What if maybe there's some husbands married to priests or pastors, but women specifically. And I want to say, I think it is a women specific, it is a wife specific thing in ministry to go through what Leah goes through so openly. And I'm so grateful for her honesty, where she talks about her identity being wrapped in this church and how she needed a win and how like other things in her life hadn't gone well and she needed this to go well. And, like it or not, right, we're still in a place where for a lot of us, even for myself, and I have job and all this, but my identity is very bound up in my husband's success. And that is it's a scary thing in any way, because it I think brings things into marriage that are vastly unhelpful. But it's really, I think, a really awful and hard thing if you're talking about a church, and I mean, RJ, I would imagine you and Jamie had Sundays. We've had Sundays in our church that's not a church plant where there weren't a ton of people there, right? And you get home and you're like, oh, there weren't a ton of people there. And it like colors your Sunday. It can color your Monday if it's your day off, here's what went wrong. Here's how we can, what's the football term people use? Monday morning quarterback.
Monday morning quarterback.
Yeah.
Nice poll.
It's just more sports. We're trying to do more sports, but
I appreciate
that.
No, I love it when you write, RJ, about AJ, that he struggles openly with anxiety, which is sort of a big part of actually what makes his ministry appealing and connect with people. And in fact, one of the people they interview who comes, she says like the way he was talking about anxiety really spoke to me, or it was one of the guys maybe, but that was the key to his actual connection. And yet he has received, this is you writing, RJ, he has received the message that to be truly successful, he needs to be the type of highly confident, unabashedly self-promotional, completely self-assured, almost superhuman leader that so many famous church planters seem to be. And then later on, he says, he questions how much faith in God he actually has and how he would act differently if he had more. For an entrepreneur, there's no ambiguity. It is all on you, even if that's not actually true. But for a church planter, there is this uncomfortable mix of purported trust in the divine and then gospel-phobic bootstrapping. There's so much to that, I think, that is it's amplified when you're trying to do a startup of any kind. I mean, I've experienced this with Mockingbird, of course, and with the ministry we do here in Charlottesville. But it's amplified, but as you can't outrun it, no matter what you do, you're going to over-identify with your ventures, with your projects, with your accomplishments. And sometimes it really does feel like God is who meets you when those things don't go as planned, and sometimes they don't go as planned in a better way. Sometimes they don't go as planned not in the way that you'd hoped, as you say, RJ. And like, it's funny. I look back on that time when we were doing that church plant, and like, those are all my closest friends. I see how many people kind of got married out of that, and I see the gifts, the a little bit of the ego that did need to die, and in order to be able to not be in the bright lights in the big city and to actually be of use to other people. And maybe that sounds like a silver lining, but as I told you when we talked about it, like, I don't think it's not a false silver lining. It's the way that God actually worked, and that He was calling you there. I think it's that Monday morning quarterbacking thing. I don't know what the whole plan was, but I do see enormous amount of fruit in my own life. And, but yeah, I think the lessons are much larger. I think this is this tension between being an entrepreneur and being a Christian is just a tension between being in the world and being a Christian, I think, or believing in Jesus and a living God and the way of the cross, and trying to breathe air in the performancistic world in which we're all ensconced, whether that be the social justice form of that, whether that be the legalistic pious side of that, whether that be the materialistic, keeping up with the Jones side of that. It runs so counter to the cross.
Well, and Dave, to say more about that biblically, because I do think about this, the question of, does God sometimes call us into a place of death? does that actually happen? And I think about Israel wandering in the desert. Have you brought us out of Egypt into the desert only to kill us? Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I've done. Like, that's why you're going to wander for 40 years, because I'm going to kill off this first generation, and then the next generation will enter the promised land. Of course, they're no better. And I think about how Christians hear what Jesus says, no one can be my disciple unless they take up their cross and follow me. And the way we interpret that has something to do with like self-sacrifice or being willing to, something like that. And that's part of it, but also this recognition that part of the Christian life, part of any life, is being put to death by God, having the part of yourself that thinks you're in control, that the part of you that wants to be God. The part of you in the Garden of Eden that says, yes, I want to be God. I will eat that fruit. I can do better. I want to be in control. I want my way. And life is just it's God saying over and over and over again, no, I am God. It's not good for you to be God. It's better for you to just be a person and to trust me. And so I do think that God calls us into death sometimes, probably all the time, and that New York, that church plant was just a huge experience of that for me. Not the only one by any means, but an experience of that, of him, of a death that there might be a resurrection, of a death of my ego, that I might move into something more like faith-based freedom rather than self-based slavery and anxiety. So...
it's interesting to work with RJ because I had known RJ through Mockingbird for a long time and was like, I'm super pumped. Still am. Love the guy. You should meet your heroes.
Never meet your heroes.
But work with him now. But we were at I've been at St. Martin's. It'll be 4 years. And we were at clergy meeting, which is like obviously just clergy. One of my first ones. And I'm super pumped. I haven't done anything in parish ministry. I've only done hospital chaplaincy. And, the altar service had started recently, which is this kind of alternative service that they have at St. Martin's. And RJ had headed up sort of the starting of it. And I was like, out loud, I said, and I still feel dumb for this, I said to RJ in front of all my colleagues, that must be so great. I mean, you must be so good at that, because it would be like planting a church. And RJ turned fully to face me and he goes, this is not like planting a church. And I was like, okay. But I felt like in that moment, there was like a whole ocean of things that RJ and Jamie have been through. And I'm really grateful that you have started writing some about it, because I think, yes, we look on the other side of that. And yes, by a lot of measures, it was a failure. But I totally agree with Dave. I mean, this is like such a personal thing, but there was a text that Dave's wife sent to RJ and to me, and Jamie may have been on there, but it was to tell us about this podcast and to know that like I get to like be included in the specialness of what happened in six years ago in New York is like, it's a gift, I mean, it's amazing what you guys did, and it may have not worked out, but you learned a lot, and I get to learn a lot through what you talk about. So anyway, I'm just glad you're writing about it.
Oh,
I mean, I encourage you to continue. Sweet. It reminds me of that amazing quote from W.H. Auden from The Age of Anxiety, where he says, "We would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather die in dread than climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die." And sometimes we're put on that cross. I think we all are. And, it strikes me as, a lot of people, the way that I hear a lot of faith talked about, if something like that had happened to them in the way that it's happened to you, RJ, they'd go through a period of deconstruction, and they'd be like, "Oh, I don't know if God is there, what's going on?" And I think that I don't want to speak for you, but that is such a superficial understanding, or I mean, I'm sympathetic to it. I've been there myself, but it is ultimately this stuff about God working through suffering, through death and resurrection. It's not just like a rationalization. It's how it actually happens, and you can't engineer it. No one ever chooses death. No one ever.
It's awful.
It's the worst
thing in the world, but it is actually how
you're here to testify that there's life on the other side of that death. I mean, it's what I can see, and I mean, I pray. I know those wounds will always be there, but you know what? Without your wound, where would your ministry be? Right? What is that?
I think it was a gift. I think it was a profound gift, and I'm not quite the place where I can look back and be like, thank you, Jesus, for this amazing gift.
No.
But maybe someday.
What does Colbert say? What afflictions of God are not gifts, or something like that? After his family all
Stephen
died.
Colbert, God bless him.
Yeah, we did not do a church plant, but we definitely had our own really tough church. And thanks to the internet, that won't be hard for people to find. It's not where we are now. And like right after we left it, I would try to spiritualize it to Josh and be like, but don't you think that Jesus and God and like this is going to make us so much? And Josh is like, no, that was really hard. I think, I don't know. I think it takes a lot of time to be able to have that perspective on this stuff. But
pretty much what I did to you in clergy meeting.
Right? Yeah, I'm the one that's always like, but wasn't it great for you? And people are like, no. Yeah, but it reminds me of, gosh, I've been thinking about this so much lately. I don't know if I talked about it the last time we recorded, but I did a big study on Ruth. Did I talk about the last time we recorded? And there's that part in Ruth.
You and I were talking about it.
Where Naomi, right? She's like,
what really happened on the threshing floor?
Yeah, right. We were not talking about that. We know it was sex. But Naomi was like, she like looks up and she's like, who, like, just call me Mara. Like, I'm bitter. Like, I don't know what God is doing. And it feels like and Dave, I know what you're saying. There are people out there that they just think God has abandoned them. And I felt that way and you felt that way. But it feels like sort of a modern thing, and it does feel superficial. I love that in scripture, people are less like God, like where, like God doesn't exist, right? And they're more like, what is God doing right now? Which I think is like the faithful response. So anyway.
It's like Robert Duvall in The Apostle, and he's just yelling at God in the attic, and someone calls over to complain. It was his mom's house, and he's like, well, since he's a little boy, he's been talking to God, and sometimes he talks to God, and sometimes he yells at God, and tonight he's yelling at God. And but I love that because it's not like God's not there. It's just kind of got to have it out with him.
Well, I think that's probably the right place to end. I want to say to the two of you that I just saw the initial layout of the Deja Vu issue of The Mockingbird, which is the new print issue is coming out in probably about 2.5 weeks. And Sarah, I think you've got something in there. I know that I do. RJ, I think we shut you out of that one intentionally. Just kidding. But it's fantastic. Good. It's a little bit of a greatest hits issue, but everything's been redone, and it's unbelievably beautiful. I also want to announce that the registration for our Oklahoma City conference, where Carrie Willard will be speaking, and Stephen Paulson and J.D. Koch, Kurt Benham will be there, Kelsey Klambara will be there, I'll be there. It's going to be fantastic, and it's very cheap. It's $30 a person. It's October 12th and 13th in Oklahoma City, and that information will be on our website. So check it out, and we'll be back with you in a couple weeks. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.